Welcome everybody to this joint webinar between Softwerx and Halcyon. The title is Enhancing Managed XDR with Advanced Ransomware Recovery, and we'll hopefully expand a lot more on what that means as we go through. The format of the events really is what used to be called a fireside chat. So obviously there's no fire involved, but we'll effectively be having what's going to be a entertaining, informative, and hopefully actionable conversation between a couple of real experts in this area in the business. So my name's Gary Owen. I'm the solutions lead for cybersecurity at Softwerx. I'd like to introduce the two panelists for today's event. Adrian Becker, who's the Softwerx CISO, and Ross Asquith, the Solutions Director of Halcyon. I don't know if you two would just like to briefly introduce yourselves. Adrian, if you'd like to start.
Thank you very much, Gary. Good morning, everyone. As Gary said, I'm Adrian Becker, the Chief Information Security Officer at Softwerx. I've worked with numerous organizations regarding helping them with business recovery, business continuity, understanding the risks to business and how to protect your information.
Great, thanks, Adrian. And Ross, would you like to do similarly?
Sure, good morning. So yes, I run the Solutions Architects team at Halcyon in Europe. Halcyon is a ransomware resilience platform. I've been in cyber for maybe 25 years now, lots of time in the SASE space, and now in the world of ransomware. So thanks for having us today.
That's fantastic. So I think everybody will agree that we should have a great time this morning. Two great speakers and a really interesting and fascinating topic. So really, just to start with, I'll just sort of set the scene. I think anybody who's been working in and around cybersecurity over the last few years has been feeling effectively the underlying pressure of of the attack surface that's getting much greater, and different types of attacks and different types of cyber threats that's out there. Absolutely, today I think all the industry analysts and Microsoft and people like that all basically say that the greatest threat, and the one that's increasing most rapidly at the moment, is ransomware. Now, typically with a lot of things in the cybersecurity space, a lot of these threats are often expressed in a very technical form. But I think the sudden increase in ransomware in the marketplace has shown that it isn't just a technical issue. It's much more about playing into business risk and the effect that it can have on the bottom line for businesses. So we're going to try and focus a little bit more on ransomware as a business risk today. We're also going to touch on why old views of security as being a sort of let's pile all of our investment into a single layer of defense around the business. It just no longer holds anymore. It definitely no longer holds with far more specialist parts of cybersecurity like ransomware. So we'll talk about that as we go through this as well. But what we'd like you to leave with by the time we finish this session is really to leave you with a sort of a feeling of clarity on ransomware, on the ransomware resilience model, and how it fits together with other elements of cybersecurity, such as XDR and managed services, the sort of things that Softwerx provides. So given that as the background, let's get the conversation started with an idea of what the bigger picture is. You know, what's changed in the threat landscape. So Adrian and Ross, if we wind back, say, 3 to 5 years, or maybe even less versus today, what do you see as having changed most in the threat landscape? And specifically from the Softwerx perspective, why are mid-market organizations feeling that more sharply today? Would you like to kick off, Adrian?
Thank you very much, Gary. I think what we've seen over the last few years is ransomware is becoming more prevalent. I think I saw a stat that in the last quarter, another 5% growth year-on-year growth of ransomware. So we're seeing that the growth is there. Also, the number of actors that is happening, they have increased, although funnily this quarter we've seen a reduction or a consolidation of providers into less providers doing the attacks, and I'm sure Ross can expand on some of this. But what we are seeing is you've got the new groups like the Gentlemen, which is a new group that started off that is really doing a number of attacks across organizations. And what's interesting, they've become less focused on the US and more focused on other areas. And what we've seen, for example, is the fact that the access to over 14,000 FortiGates, for example, because there was a vulnerability, nobody's patched it, and they're still having access to those type of environments. But I think what has changed is the fact it's no longer just about the ransom itself. It is about encrypting the data, but it's actually extracting the data. Let's exfil the data. Let's hold it to ransom. And that is one of the key differences that we've seen. And also with AI, and I hate the word everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, but it's made it a little bit easier. It's given more paths in, and no longer is it just we put the malware on your machine. It's all of the different areas of getting access to the environment to extract data and to be able to also encrypt the data. And what I would say is really understanding what the objectives of the organizations are. The other final bit that I will mention is what we've seen as well is that it's not just big government organizations or large organizations that get targeted. It's all organizations that we see. And in a lot of cases, this might be nation state actors, but you just become effectively collateral damage in the process, unfortunately. But those attacks is everywhere. And what was interesting, when you look at the sectors, like 33% of businesses has been targeted. Then you look at manufacturing is about another 11-14%, and that's how they distribute across. Ross, I don't know what you.
I think before we go to Ross, I think that's interesting. First of all, the industrialization of ransomware. I think that's a really interesting point. Secondly, I think we're all now aware that mid-market organizations all play a role in the supply chain of businesses and how they, although it might be a small company, it might have a massive knock-on effect. So sorry, Ross, before I jumped in before you get in.
I think Adrian covered off the major points. I'd agree with all of them. I'd double down on that move into the RAS space, right? The ransomware as a service model that has definitely over the past 5, maybe 10 years, come to the fore. So now you don't necessarily need to be a skilled threat actor to use somebody else's ransomware service. With that comes those specialisms that again you hinted at, right? The initial access brokers. You don't need to hack your way into someone's organization. You can just buy that access. It becomes extremely easy to get that initial foothold within a business. So these things have changed. These specialisms have come in. The RAS groups have become predominant in terms of who the tools that are going to be used. And I think again I'd probably say the same thing that Adrian said about them becoming smarter with data that they take, right? We've seen examples of where maybe they've stolen data, it contains information about individuals, and then they'll go after those individuals and try and ransom them, right? There's this different, more creative ways of using or extorting either the individuals or the companies being attacked.
I think that's it. That's interesting. So, as the specialist in ransomware, I mean, what are you typically seeing attackers, optimize for? Is it, speed, disruption, extortion, leverage, or indeed, all of the above?
We've probably a bit of all of the above, but we've definitely seen the sort of what's often called the dwell time shorten. It's often in the past been the case that a breach has happened and then there's many weeks before the ransomware consequences come to light. But we've seen that shorten to days, if not hours, in some cases. Some of that's aided with some AI things, or maybe we could talk about that later. But yes, it's got faster. Again, a little bit smarter with what they do with that data. I think most of the time there's still that dual access complex aspect of extortion, right? Steal the data and also encrypt the data, the operational impact as well as the regulatory or privacy impact, however you look at it. But we do see some groups doing just data exfiltration, right? Because that's, to some organizations, more of a problem than the operational hit of encryption.
And are either of you or are both of you seeing this, the thing I mentioned earlier about how essentially ransomware somehow feels more personal? It's more, I mean, it is a technical breach involving very technical things, but it's quite akin in some senses to sort of social engineering type attacks. So we're definitely seeing, and I think the industry is seeing as well, this idea of ransomware sort of moving from being an IT incident to being something that's much more significant as a sort of board level business risk. Is that something that would either of you would echo?
Absolutely. I think from what I've seen is it is a board level discussion, and it is a significant risk and fear by the board and a number of the organizations I talk about, because we got to remember from a board level's point of view, they do not always understand the technical side or the technical risks, but they understand the impact to the business. So they do understand in theory what the issue is, how it technically works, high level, but from their point of view, at the end of the day, it's all about what is the business impacts going to be. And we can just go back to the Jaguar Land Rover, we've got M&S, so there's numerous examples over the last year where the impact has been in billions. And the fact is, with ransomware and the changes, some of these impacts can actually affect GDP, as was forecasted for the UK not too long ago. And I think that is what's changed. Suddenly it's realized it's no longer just a technical interruption or a technical nuisance that means I can't work. They've started to realize this is going to have a material effect on our bottom line, our ability to exist, and can become an existential threat to our organizations, because in some cases these organizations do not recover. And I think nowadays it's got to be part of your incident response, your business continuity, your business impact, that you've got to plan on a day-to-day basis. And from a board level, they want to know that they have all the options on the table.
Are you seeing greater board level involvement in the significance of ransomware solutions, Ross?
I think there's greater awareness within the board, definitely, right? They're asking questions of perhaps their IT or security teams about it, because they understand it now, right? Thanks to it being in the newspapers and stuff last year, right? So, but I liked your description, Gary, of it feeling personal. I think that's good, because it is ultimately, ransomware is not like old school malware, right? It's not something that you accidentally download in your browser and it does something on your machine, right? It's a human-led campaign against your organization.
Somebody's pointing at you.
Yeah, it does feel personal, right? They need to get that access and so on and so forth. So I think it is personal. When you get a ransomware note, when your employees are contacted, whatever the feeling is, it's humans doing this to you, and it really feels like that, which makes it harder, I think. So on a human level, I guess.
Okay, so that's an interesting backdrop to all of this. So I think we've established that we all believe the threat's changing. I mean, both in terms of actually what the threat is, but also the degree and the level of threat that's out there. So let's briefly talk about why old models of defense, especially with regards to ransomware, are starting to come up short. So where are we as a sort of joint organization starting to see most often traditional security models fall short against typical modern ransomware? I mean, are there particular areas? Is it mainly to do with endpoints, or is it to do with defense in depth? Is it complacency? Is it all of those things? Do you want to just riff a bit about that, Ross? Are you seeing, where are you seeing the biggest opportunities for Halcyon, really?
Yeah, well, I guess we talked about the initial access brokers earlier, right? It all starts with someone finding a way in, and we've seen those social engineering type attacks. In some cases leveraging AI to make that happen. But once they're in, then there's obviously the tools that you generally find within an organization to prevent the further movement, lateral movement, escalation of privilege, things like that within the environment. So it kind of bleeds into a conversation probably about that kind of assumed breach mentality, right? I think it's more realistic nowadays to assume that this is going to happen at some point. And therefore, what have you got on the inside that's going to detect that anomaly, right? And I think if you can disrupt a ransomware attack, before we start talking about them exfiltrating your data or encrypting your data, then that's obviously a good thing, right? Sure, if you can't detect them until they try and do those things, then so be it. But if we can detect them when they're sort of staging, when they initially breach, I think that's super valuable. And obviously that's in our wheelhouse. We're interested in identifying any ransomware attack against our customer as early as possible. And it's probably in Softwerx' interest to do that as well, right?
Yeah. Adrian?
I think what we are seeing is the attack paths used to be the endpoint only, or endpoint was the most common, and it still is. But what's interesting, some of the statistics is like bring your own device. No longer are threat actors breaking in, they're logging in. It is that bit of using the social engineering, using legitimate IDs, which make it sometimes harder to detect the initial identity compromise, and then being able to take over the machines, taking actions. And as we said, as Ross said, yes, even before they're exfilling data, they are exploring what are their options. And I think we touched on it earlier, what we're seeing, it's a smash and grab mentality, as I like to call it these days. We know that the tools are getting better. We know that there's hundreds of tools on the market that tells you we'll detect ransomware, we'll prevent it. But I think what we want to see, and what we are seeing, is that the attackers realize that, and depending on what you're doing, what your approach is how much data can we get out of in the shortest point. But I think as well, the whole fact that the encryption, the damage that we've done with these threat actors, we're seeing more and more that they are exploring all of the attack surface. So what is this whole zero trust, as Ross said, but it's understanding what do you have in place? What are all of the entry points? And I'll give an example. Worked with a customer where had all of the tools, the threat actors were inside the system for 2 weeks. The alarms went off everywhere, but nobody was actually monitoring it. And although they had the right tools to prevent it, the way that they actually got in was through a legacy system that didn't have MFA on. And that's how they got on. And there was nothing on that system. And because they got through a legitimate account, everybody just assumed everything was fine. It's only when the data started leaving the building that the alarm was raised. And when they started going after their customers, because guess what? They're part of the supply chain, and the customers who had much better processes, 24/7 security monitoring, noticed that and went, hold on, what are you doing? Why are you trying to exfil data from our environment? And they didn't realize that they were compromised. So that's an example of the fact that no longer can you just believe, if I don't come in on Monday and my machine says, sorry, your environment's been encrypted, that you have not been compromised. And that's what we're seeing, is all of these different areas, from mobile phones, from devices, from identities, from web applications, to all of your legacy systems that you still have. And I think that's a challenge that organizations face, is we've got to keep the business running. We can't just always use the latest and greatest or apply the latest patches, because we're in the real world. Yes, we would love to, but in manufacturing, you might have machines that cost you £1 million to replace and update the Windows machine. So you've got to think about, what do we do longer term? But absolutely, the defense, that complexity is moving forward.
Yeah, and I think we should probably stress, we're not sort of pointing the fingers at individual security products and saying they're bad. I mean, any cyber defense is better than no cyber defense. But I think it's increasingly becoming obvious that modern security is really about defense in depth. It's not the old castle walls model of security any longer. It's making sure that everything within your environment is secure, and acknowledging that nothing is 100%, and it's better to assume that you have or will be breached, rather than putting all your money into trying to prevent it happening in the first place. So if defense against cyber threats should be multi-layered. Let's actually start to define some of those layers. So first, we'll have a look at what Softwerx's managed XDR product, Secure 365, is contributing to this sort of broader fight. So, Adrian, for someone new to Secure 365, or somebody who just basically is new to this area, what problem does a managed XDR service like Secure 365 solve, especially for mid-market organizations? And in practice, what does managed XDR mean to the business?
Lots of questions there, so I'll try and break those down a little bit.
And I'll keep you short.
For most businesses that we engage with, we see that they are leveraging Microsoft, who is one of the largest security providers in the world, spend over 20 billion pounds, spending more dollars, sorry, and spending another 20 billion in the coming years. So we're seeing that they have all of these great tools. But what we are seeing with organizations is that ability, firstly, to configure those, and then secondly, to manage and monitor and respond to that on a 24/7 basis. And with our Secure 365, we provide a managed detection response service, bringing all of your logs, all of your signals, all of your incidents into Microsoft Sentinel inside your tenant. So with our service, we are your eyes and ears that sits there in the background, monitoring what is happening in your environment and then helping stop the attacks as they come in. So from a business point of view, why is it important? Is that ability to know that come the weekend, come evenings, there's somebody that's there monitoring my environment, knowing exactly when those messages are coming in that we've been compromised. And if I base it on my earlier example for this organization that's been breached, that we got involved in, we actually were able to prove that they were in the environment 2 weeks. The signals did go off, the alarms did go off, but nobody was watching and monitoring them and just ignored it because they didn't have the capacity or the time to look at those. And that is what Secure 365 helps organizations. We provide you with that security team, that safety net to look at all of the incidents, take action. And the best part with the solution, it all stays inside your environment. So you don't have to worry about data leaving your environment or information leaving your tenant.
Yeah, so I think absolutely, that's certainly the way we go to market, and it's the message that resonates best, I think, with our customers. I think I'd also add that most mid-market organizations, their business profile means that they can't afford a true 24/7 365 SOC facility internally within their organization. So and that gives them a problem. But specifically also because of the position of mid-market organizations in extended supply chains, often in much towards much larger organizations, actually, even though they can't afford it, they need to have an enterprise class cybersecurity capability within their organization, and therefore having the ability to be able to take that as a service from somebody like Softwerx is extremely important. I'd say the other way of looking at it as well is that Secure 365 is a sort of it's a very broad, holistic solution. It really covers all elements of cybersecurity from right over from the left to the right. It covers everything. It's not, however, necessarily a specialist cybersecurity solution for ransomware, which is my very clumsy intro to you, Ross, to show how that works, and then we can talk about how the two products can work together later. So give me a sort of a background to, why does ransomware warrant a purpose-built solution like Halcyon rather than just being treated as another sort of broad brush threat that is just out there?
Yeah, I think the high level answer to that question, requiring a dedicated tool to defend against it, disrupt and attack against you, is just the level of the level of impact that a ransomware attack can have, right? If it's the number one risk, right? So I want to have a tool that specializes in dealing with it. If you look at the example that was given, alerts going off from, the EDR or XDR and being kind of not noticed or not monitored. That's one way that ransomware sneaks past that layer of control. The other is that the ransomware don't think that the RAS groups don't know, these tools, whether it's an EDR from vendor XYZ, they'll have those in a lab. They're building tools to actively bypass those things, right? So having a layer beyond traditional EDR, which is the primary defense people have on their endpoints, is important. It is that layered story, right? And not just another layer of prevention, but maybe a layer of resilience that could help with the recovery should encryption happen, or detect the data exfiltration should the attack progress to that stage. So really, this is where Halcyon sees itself, right? We want to both integrate with the service, obviously, that Softwerx are offering, so that we can give you additional information about what's happening on those machines that's very specific, laser focused on ransomware, but also be able to proactively prevent things from happening should attacks progress past whatever defenses are in place currently.
So you describe Halcyon in particular as sort of disrupting every stage of a ransomware attack. You have features of the various elements of it. So how does that actually manifest itself at a high level? What do you actually see as a result of that multi-layer approach?
Yeah, so the subtle difference, I think, between what we're looking for within the environment that we're installed into is that we're not necessarily looking just for things that are malicious. We could be looking for tools that are used by a ransomware threat actor that in themselves aren't malware. Maybe they're network scanners or they're remote access tools, right? These things won't typically get picked up by an EDR because they're not malware, right? But we know from our research and tracking these ransomware groups which of those tools are used, and we can look out for them. And that's often the earliest opportunity you have to detect that you have been breached in some way and that there is some unauthorized user within your environment. So looking for those things early on is probably our number one gain. But as I say, if the EDR gets taken out of the picture, having something else there to help protect the organization is extremely valuable as a sort of add-on, if you like, additional layer to what you have around with an XDR service or EDR platform. Okay,
that's very clear. So I think we're in a position, just to summarize now, where we can see that we sort of frame Secure 365 from Softwerx as being, as I say, the broad solution that covers the holistic solution that covers cyber security in general across the organization, almost like almost as as a coordinating layer. You can see it as that, and then we sort of position Halcyon as being this much deeper level of functionality, which is designed specifically for to address the needs of ransomware resilience, for instance. So the obvious question then is, we've got both broad managed XDR and we've got deep ransomware resilience. So we should try and connect the dots, I guess. Why together is that a sort of a 1 + 1 = 3 solution? So I say we make that claim, 1 + 1 = 3. So in plain English, why do we both think that customers would benefit or need both an MXDR solution like Secure 365 and a ransomware disruption and recovery solution like Halcyon? And why isn't that just merely overlap? Adrian, do you want to just get that off, maybe?
Absolutely, and I think I'm going to answer that in two levels at the moment from a point of view, and I'm going to try and put it to the business risk and then more on the technical layer. And for everybody on the call, to be completely transparent, I use both in our organization, so I won't be saying this if I haven't, but the conversation with my board was quite easy from a board level point of view when I went to our group, for example. It is by integrating Halcyon, we are provided with options. So yes, we have our Secure 365, which will do the detections, use the Microsoft technology, and the teams will be response. However, there is always going to be that new bit of technology that nobody's seen, that new bit of information that has been designed to bypass whichever solution you've got in place. And from my point of view, why did it get my attention? One, it provides additional signals, but from a board level conversation, it provides me with options. When I went to my board to say, absolutely, we are protected, we monitor for ransomware protection, and if we do get hit, do not worry, we have a disaster recovery plan, and and also we might need to pay the ransom if it's that severe, but hopefully never do. But it gives me options, because with Halcyon, it provides me with extra signals to tell my technical team that there's a potential incident that's happening, or that something is trying to tamper with our systems that might be missed by one of the other areas, which then the security operations team can respond to. But from a business perspective, it gives me an option where if we did get hit with a zero-day ransomware attack, and we couldn't necessarily need to make the decision, do we pay the ransom, which our position is not, or do we invoke disaster recovery? Disaster recovery might take me a week to recover, or multiple times, whereas with the Halcyon option, I've got the ability to create a decryption key, which will let me potentially bring that recovery window down to hours, not weeks. And from a business point of view, that is worth a significant disruption to our potential business impact. And that is why our board was very keen to onboard Halcyon as a complementary service to what we already have in place, and that defense in depth. But then coming back to more the technical side is the fact that yes, Halcyon is its own solution, but it integrates fully with Sentinel, and we've also got the fact that it sits next to Defender. It very much complements and provides that enriched information. And let's be honest, the more visibility you have, the more chance you have of stopping an attack or observing that potential damage to your organization. And the last bit I will say is, and I always say this, people will say, well, isn't it two products? Is one not better than the other? It is ones that complement each other. And from my point of view, I see security as a team sport. We all got to work together. We got to take as much information as we can together to give us the best chance to prevent an incident happening. But we should plan for that incident to happening. And that's where Halcyon provides me with that extra level of security.
So Ross, how would you characterize this 1 + 1 = 3?
And Adrian's touched on, some of what we do and some of our unique capabilities around recovery. And I think, it comes back to that layered defense, right? And you might think, well, why would I even need to recover, right? If I've got these enhanced prevention and I've got the XDR service from Softwerx, it shouldn't happen, right? But it does happen. If we look back to last summer, those large organizations that we were ransomware, okay, they weren't using Halcyon and they weren't using Softwerx, but they had mature and significant investments in IT security, and it still happened to them, right? So I think, it's a layered story.
It's not whether I'll be breached, it's just when, in reality, these days.
Yeah, are you feeling lucky? I mean, that's not a strategy, is it? We know that. So yeah, I like Adrian's kind of description of having options, and that's often how I talk about it, right? Do you want to pay the ransom when the worst thing happens, or do you want to go to backups, which for most people should probably be reviewed as kind of a last resort, really, because it's not always straightforward, and those backups may have been compromised by the attack, right? It happens. So we're giving you another option for recovery. So we're not going into all the details of it, and an option to decrypt the files that were encrypted during the attack. And yeah, for more detail, I guess we can follow up.
Okay. All right. So I mean, I sort of like the phrasing that in terms of a neat, very high level positioning. I mean, Secure 365 sort of manages the fight. Halcyon guarantees the outcome if ransomware gets through. That's a sort of decent way of positioning, I think. All right. So given all of that, let's try and turn this into a practical discussion. If any of the audience watching this wants to build a ransomware resilience playbook, for instance, where actually would they start? What are the first 3 things that they need to do in the next 30 days if that was going to be the thing going forward? a playbook for making ransomware resilience a thing within your organization. Do you want to start that Ross?
Yeah, I mean, what's your playbook? And you need to, I think we know pretty well the sort of techniques that the ransomware groups are going to be using, right? There's no doubt that you need to look at your perimeter as that point of entry and deal with improvements there, right? Multi-factor authentication, good patching, all that kind of stuff. In terms of internally moving quickly, I can't help but promote Halcyon there, because I mean, we're a simple tool, right? To deploy Halcyon, it's an endpoint rollout, it's easy, and we've seen customers move extremely fast. In fact, we've seen customers move post-incident to deploy Halcyon, where they're under enormous pressure and they need something out on the machines to see what's happening in their environment. So I think our goal, as well as providing great ransomware resilience, is to make the use and deployment of our tool easy, right? Because there's nothing worse than a security tool that's complicated and difficult and creates noise and so on. So yeah, we're all about making things easy, I guess, would be my short answer to moving quickly.
Yeah, Adrian.
I think
I've got three points which I'll raise at the end, and you can react to those. But Adrian, do you want to add something?
I think from organizations is that the playbook is, have we got a cyber incident response plan? What are our options when this happens? And the best part I always say is, will we pay the ransom? And the answer that I normally get is no. But I think actually play this through logically. Everything that you have is encrypted. You don't have a business if you don't pay the ransom. Is your answer still the same? And I think it's playing those real life scenarios through, and then understanding what the risks and the impact to the business is going to be. But also then, what can we do to mitigate or reduce that risk? And I think if for the board is to go and understand and speak to their organizations to say, if we get hit tomorrow by a ransomware, what is the impact on the business? Can we recover? And the answer would probably, we've got backups or disaster recovery. Has it actually been tested? And I think that's that whole scenario where you don't know what the situation is until you have to recover in real life. And what was interesting, I think I saw it on Sky not too long ago, Hiscox for the mid-market, for the SMB market, paid 80% of all ransomware claims because it was cheaper to pay the ransomwares to try and then to recover. But then you do have the additional risks around paying ransomware. Are you funding terrorism? Because you need to know who you're paying and all of that. So from my point of view, think about what is that impact, how we can detect if the incidents are happening, how can we take action very quickly, and that's the one bit. So understand what is your risk appetite, and what's the impact to your business going to be from a board level point of view.
Yeah, I think that all very relevant, and I'd summarize it really in three ways. I think 3 points. One is how do you balance ransomware detection readiness or general cybersecurity detection readiness versus recovery readiness? Because they are two discrete things. And you need to determine how you invest in both of them and what levels are appropriate, which is essentially a business risk decision for your individual business. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, and Adrian, you touched on this, which is that I think boards are now becoming very much aware of ransomware as a business risk. So as a person maybe taking these solutions to a board, what is it that you tell the board? What's the business case that you make to them? I think that's really important as well. And then finally, we talked a bit about this earlier. It's how does this fit with the message that security isn't just a single layer anymore? It's about why layering matters. And if somebody already has Microsoft security in place, what's the simplest way to think about layering a dedicated ransomware solution on top of that to sort of do so without creating chaos. So those, I think, are the 3 points I would actually put forward as being the key thing about having a dedicated ransomware solution, and how does it integrate with your existing solution. So for instance, something like Secure 365? How do they work holistically? Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground actually in the last 40 minutes or so. So I think at this point, if you two are all right with it, I'll actually sort of open it up and to the audience and see if we can answer a few questions. If you have some questions, you have I think a Q&A icon on your screen. If you want to ask a question, please do so. And we'll give it sort of 10 seconds to get the first of those in. So yeah, if you want to do that now. In the meantime, I've got a couple of questions which I think were there at the beginning. So Adrian, I think one for you. We're sort of talking here about a joint solution between two companies that have very, very clear market positioning. So within that idea of a solution, do you see Halcyon as replacing Microsoft Defender or Secure 365 within an overall cybersecurity play?
Definitely not. I think the whole idea with your XDR is to give you that holistic view from all of your data sources, all of your information that goes beyond just the endpoints. It is looking at what's happening around your identity, what's happening around your other systems that might not be covered, your IoT devices, so your Azure environment. So it's very much giving you visibility regarding the comprehensive environment that we support and monitor. The beauty with Halcyon, and Ross has said it much more eloquently, it is that additional layer, it's that additional ability to view what's happening on the endpoint, looking at what's being tampered beyond what Microsoft is detecting, give you a different perspective, but still feeding into the Microsoft environment. So, and they are designed that they both sit next to each other and been engineered. So it gives you that additional visibility on the most likely entry point where ransomware will be executed. And from my perspective, that just enhances the signals, enhances the information that we get, which means that the security analyst can take action much faster, be much more confident. And where we potentially have the incident where one stops working or one of them failing to get signals, you have the second layer that's also still sending you signals, which again provides you with that confidence that we have a multi-layered defense.
Okay, that's a great, very clear answer. Ross, one for you. Do I still need backups and DR if I have Halcyon?
Yes, although I've hinted at the fact that we have a capability to maybe recover encrypted files. When we talk about layers, there's other reasons why you might need your backups, right? It may not be because of ransomware. So we're not out to say that you don't need backups, you don't need immutable backups. They're another layer in the defense against ransomware, and they're probably already in the environment. So we're definitely not looking to displace those or say you don't need them anymore. We are there as another option, as Adrian says, should the worst happen. And you might choose not to use us to do your decryption, right? It might be that your backups are there and readily available, all good. And that's fine. You've got out of trouble. That's all that matters. But if for some reason you needed us, at least the option's there on the table.
Okay, that's also very clear. So a question here, what should I tell my CEO or CFO about the value of a joint solution? I guess that's a question that plays towards, what's the value proposition that resonates at a board level for a joint implementation of something like Secure 365 and Halcyon together? Adrian, do you want to start on that?
Yes. From a board level point of view, we have the ability to, our environment is being managed, monitored on a 24/7 basis, and we have the best visibility possible regarding attacks that's happening, which will mean that we can continue operating on a 24/7 basis. But as we touched on a few places earlier, is the fact that we are able to have these options for when we do have that 0-day impact. What is the interruption? And I'll give you a practical example. If I can recover my environment because we've got hit by a 0-day, I've got a few hundred machines remotely. If I can recover that very quickly by just deploying a decryption via Intune versus reinstalling 700 machines, that business impact will be significantly reduced. And that's what we get, is that option to reduce the time window it takes to get back to business as usual. And that's the cost versus the impact that's going to be weighed up. And for some organizations, that could actually mean financial penalties for missing SLAs. For the other organizations, it could mean we stop trading, we stop having details to our accounts. And I think that's the part. And the one that we always forget, yes, we back up everything, but until you've done a proper DR test, do you really know you have everything that is key to your organization? And if that's encrypted, you're dead in the water. And I can always use the example where I worked with organizations, they had regular backups, but when they got hit with crypto, with encryption, they went to restore. And the one thing they didn't back up was their database, because somebody moved it and nobody ever tested to see if it works. So they were backing up an empty database and they were dead in the water. And that's a good example. So I know it's a slightly longer answer, but yes, from a business point of view, it provides me with mitigations and risk reduction at a very simplistic level.
Okay. Faith,
Hey,
I think that you want to interrupt.
yeah, there are a few more questions I've seen come up on my side. One said, are we going to see what Halcyon does?
Not on this session, I think, but the intention is that both organisations will be having their own demo sessions, but we'll also be following up this session in a week or so's time with a technical demo session of the joint value proposition of what we've been talking about. So Secure 365 and Halcyon together. So Halcyon essentially being added in via Sentinel as an extra set of instrumentation to Secure 365, allowing you to improve the holistic cybersecurity view that Secure 365 can do. I mean, I think that's right, both of you, isn't it? The event later on will be demonstrating the joint solution. I think it's next week or the week after, something like that.
That's my understanding, and it's great that people are keen to see it. I love it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
One question does say, how do two 24/7 services avoid stepping on each other during an incident?
Great question.
Yeah,
Great
maybe I
question.
should talk to that, because
Please do, Ross.
we know that as a solution, we are always going to be sitting next to some sort of EDR or XDR service. And therefore, we take the view that we will defer to that service, right? If let's say you're running Defender on your machines and it blocks something, right? We don't need to tell you about that as well, right? Or generate another alert that you already know about. So, we kind of take this differential position where we don't interfere with the EDR if it's doing what it should be doing. And the same would extend to managing an incident, right? If an incident kicks off and you're a customer of Softwerx and their service, then they're probably going to lead that incident response, and we become like subject matter experts, right? We're there if you need us. Obviously, if you need us to help with recovery, that's totally in our wheelhouse. But if you need expertise on ransomware, on the group that maybe has attacked you, or how to deal with it, then we're there. We've got plenty of experience of it, but we're not looking to run the show. Unless, of course, you don't have anyone else to help you deal with the incident, then we'll step up and we'll help out. But certainly in these kind of joint offerings, like we're proposing here, we're there just as part of the team. We'll join the war room, we'll lend our expertise, but we're not going to try and muscle in on trying to take the lead if we're not needed to.
Thank you
want to
for
answer that,
that.
Adrian?
Yes, and it's the playbook really about the response. And I think when it goes beyond the endpoint, when it goes further afield, when it goes beyond certain systems, you've got to have that holistic view that, as we said, it's not just the endpoint, it's just not the certain systems, it is that holistic view. And with the playbooks, the interaction, and when, for example, when the teams are taking action, it might be that we do need to start building a decryption key. That's where the teams come in. But those playbooks exist where the teams can work together, deal with those responses that's most optimal, and get the best result for the customer to get them back up and running. And that's the important bit, is to get that moving forward quickly.
Where would all these logs go? Is there anything that would leave my environment? Is one of the questions.
Ross.
Adrian?
I will put in there, but please correct me if I'm wrong. There is some metadata that leaves the environment, but most of the logs will be pumped into Microsoft Sentinel, but there is some metadata that leaves the environment, but it's hosted. Can you just confirm where that goes to, Ross?
Well, yeah, specifically for our service, we're a SaaS-based model. So if you deploy our agent on your machines, then alerts and events and maybe files that need analyzing, things like that, need to be analyzed in our cloud backend. So, you know, we host that here in Europe within AWS. And so those events and alerts would then be forwarded on to Softwerx and the Secure 365 service so that they could be consumed in a timely fashion by the team. So it comes through us. You can view our data in our portal, but obviously where the greatest value lies in us passing that information on as quickly as possible into the Secure 365 service, where it can be actioned and correlated with the other information that you guys are seeing from Defender and such.
Thank you.
Okay. I think with that we're a little bit over the time we'd planned for this, but I think it's probably worth it. I think it was a really useful and stimulating conversation between the pair of you. So thank you so much, Adrian and Ross. I'd mentioned that people attending the actual webinar live, or those listening to a recording later, keep an eye out. There'll be further announcements with regards to follow-ups to this, including a more technical live demo, including the ability to have conversations, more in-depth conversations with both Softwerx and Halcyon experts in this. It'll all be made available over the next few weeks. And I also said we'll make sure that you have access to the recording of the actual webinar itself, so you can actually go back and see whether there's bits of what we've said that you agree with or disagree with, or want to have an argument with us about. Any of those are good. So just think it's a really important area of the business. I think both companies are really excited by the prospect of the added value that we get for this. We really do believe in this 1 + 1 = 3 argument with regards to the two solutions together. So again, just to repeat, thank you very, very much, Adrian. Thank you, Ross. And with that, I think we'll call it a day. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.